Hi, everybody, and welcome to Momentum Boost. I am, of course, your host, Adrienne Gold Davis, and I am truly delighted you're joining us tonight. And not just because I am not just the host tonight, but also your guest. I'm thrilled because this month at Momentum, we're discussing the value, the principle of peace and wholeness in the home. And I can't imagine anything or any concept that is more important for us to truly master than the art of forgiveness. Now, I'm going to talk about that this evening without bringing on a special guest because this is a dilemma that I have struggled with for most of my life. I have, unfortunately, a tendency towards grudge holding or using past situations that caused me pain or rage to color the way I interact with people. And some 25 years ago, I started working on that because I saw that Judaism teaches us that we are supposed to be forgiving. Now, please remember that this notion of forgiveness is not without boundaries. So the first thing I want to say, so that it's really clear and nobody's defenses are up, is this. Forgiveness is a process, A, and B, it doesn't preclude boundaries, which is to say that you can definitely determine that if a hurt or a wound or a situation is so toxic, a person is so toxic for you, that you cannot readmit them into your life in a full capacity, that is acceptable. There are many levels of forgiveness, and according to the Talmud, one only needs to get to level 1 to not be perceived as cruel. So I'm going to begin with those levels of forgiveness. And of course, most of us would desire to reach the fullest form of forgiveness, but that isn't always possible. So that's number one. The number two of it is that we need to understand the terms. Socrates says that the beginning of wisdom is always the definition of terms. So the first thing I want us to do is really understand what forgiveness is, but more, what forgiveness is not. And just know that within your family, whatever it's made of, whatever it looks like, even if it's your chosen family, you should know that being able to take mastery over this will make the difference between a peaceful environment and a life of pain, and not just for the other person, but for you as well. I'm sure most of you have heard that expression that says, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting everybody else around you to get sick. And I think it's the truth. Forgiveness is not just for others, it's for ourselves as well. But again, as I said, it permits boundaries. So what isn't forgiveness? Well, first of all, forgiveness is not identical to clarity. Clarity is when you understand why the thing that happened. It is easy to offer forgiveness when we have clarity. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Many years ago, there was a teacher in a school system who was beginning to behave inappropriately. He was making innuendos and comments that were decidedly unprincipled. And he was the principal. And it was a huge problem. There was tons of complaints from students and from parents. And they literally rode him out of town on a rail. Like they honestly stuck him on a train and had him leave the community. He was, in the public pillory. They hated him and they could never forgive him for betraying the trust of the entire organization by making these comments. It's not like he touched anybody, God forbid, but he would make inappropriate comments. It was as though he had no filter. And he was public enemy number 1. And 6 months later, they discovered that he had a tumor in the part of his brain that suppressed inappropriate urges. I'm not even sure what that part of the brain is, but somebody's going to write it in the chat, I'm sure. And he had brain surgery. And it became clear that so much of his actions and reactions and behaviors were tied to this physical ailment. Now, sadly, this man did not live. But of course, the town and the entire community forgave him because now they understood that his behavior wasn't really a reflection on them. It was a reflection of the illness he was suffering from. And when they had clarity, they could see their way clear to forgive. We don't always get clarity. And forgiveness is not something that's given in a situation where there is an ability to understand. It's not clarity. It's not, oh, well, this restores my ego, which was so badly bruised by your behavior. You were walking down the street and somebody across the street who you knew really well, you waved at them and they didn't respond. And you happened to run into them twice that morning. And both times you felt like they blew you off, like they ignored you. And you were furious and hurt. And you discovered later in the day that they had gone for an eye examination and they had those drops put in and their pupils had been dilated and they were not able to wear their glasses or their contacts and they just couldn't see you. There are a million examples like that. But when you find out what happened, you're not angry anymore because you have clarity. Someone keeps bumping into you from behind and you feel enraged and you turn around and you see they have a white cane. And suddenly all the rage just dissipates. It disappears. That is clarity. And so many of us withhold forgiveness until we find clarity. And my friends, there are times where that clarity will not come in this lifetime. And sometimes the hardest apology you will ever have to accept is the one that you will never receive. That's right, never. Now, this is not to say that you have to forgive somebody to the fullest extent when they've caused you tremendous damage. In fact, Jewish law says that when we cause someone pain, it is incumbent upon us to do the work, what we call at Rosh Hashanah time, teshuvah, which is the return to our essence, our essential self, which is good, by owning our mistake, not making excuses for our mistake, speaking it out loud, admitting it, making reparation, dealing with the damages, and coming up with a plan in place that we can tell the person we hurt so that, well, they have something in place that won't repeat the same issue. And there are lots of examples in the Torah about teshuvah, about people who made errors. In fact, the entire Bible begins with forgiveness. Remember Adam and Eve, they ate from that tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And they had that first original sin, remember that? And not original sin, the way it's understood by other religions, where the human being is born somehow flawed and spends their life undoing that. No, we don't believe that. But I mean that eating of that tree and everything that happened after that. They were supposed to die when they ate from that tree, but they didn't. Remember, they were sent out into the world. And as Joni Mitchell so aptly put it once in her fabulous song, Woodstock, remember, they were stardust, they were golden, and they tried to make their way back to the garden. Each and every one of us will at some point in our life do something that requires forgiveness. Each and every one of us will need that forgiveness, and we will be trying to find our way back to the garden. And one of the most important things you can do is help the person who caused you that pain find their way back, not necessarily to the inner circle of your life, but because we learn that the kind of forgiveness we offer, that God is our mirror, and the forgiveness that we will receive will be in direct relationship with that which we can give. It is called in Hebrew, mida keneged mida, measure for measure. In accordance to your mercy, in accordance to the way you are willing to forgive and move on, so do the heavens. But again, and I want to reiterate, it's not entirely about not setting boundaries. So let's go to that first piece, level one. In accordance to the late Lubavitcher Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, he explained about these levels in a very clear way that I want to share with you. Essentially, he said that the first level is that you're still hurt, you're still angry, your heart's still broken, whatever that might be, or perhaps the damage is still occurring. but you can get yourself at least to the level where you don't wish them ill. Now, most of you are saying to yourself, I don't wish anybody ill, but we do. We do. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples from my own life. I used to have this fantasy. I had, this guy that I was in love with when I was like 17 years old, but desperately in love with. And when I went to camp that summer, he ended up going out with my best friend. Okay, I hated her, not him, because I was still hoping he'd love me one day, but her, I hated her. And I used to have these fantasies, so much so that I was concerned I was losing my mind. The fantasy was like this, that she and this boy I loved would be driving out in the car, and their car would go off a cliff, and she would explode into fire and die, and he would scream my name at the last moment, like he suddenly had clarity that I was the one for him. Okay, sick, right? So I went to a psychiatrist, and I paid money to say to this dude, listen, I feel like I'm psychotic. What is wrong with me? And you know what he said? He said, if he had $1 for every jilted young woman who had a death wish fantasy on their ex, he would never have to work for a living. He said, it's not appropriate. You're right, but it's not abnormal. So the first thing you want to do, even if it's as simple as, for example, you get divorced and, what does it mean to not wish your ex well? I hope you never meet anyone else. I hope you're alone for the rest of your life. I hope the children grow up to hate you like I do. All of those things are included in that category, and they're not good for you. Forget them, because remember, when you drink poison, the other person does not die. You do. So this first level means that you can even wish them well. And the best way of explaining this, in my opinion, comes from the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Now, you remember that in the shtetl that they lived in, Anatevka, so they had this rabbi, this Rebbe, who they all went to with all of their questions, right? So one guy comes up to the rabbi and he says to him, Rebbe, in Jewish life, we have a blessing for everything. And we do. We have a blessing, for seeing a rainbow. We have a blessing for seeing a new flowering tree. We have a blessing after we go to the bathroom. We have a blessing for every food we eat. So he says to the Rebbe, tell me, is there a blessing for the evil czar, who was, of course, in charge of all of them in those days? And the Rebbe laughed and said, of course, may God bless and keep the czar far away from us. And that's level 1 of forgiveness. You're angry. The person is toxic for you. The situation is untenable. You want nothing to do with them, but you can get yourself to a place where you can say they should be well, they should be healthy, they should live a good life, just far away from me. And as the Rebbe said, this level is the level that you need to achieve in order to not be considered cruel. The Jewish people are supposed to be forgiving, full of rachamim, compassion. So that's level 1. The boundaries are up. You don't want to be in the room with the person. You don't want to see the person. You don't want any part of the person, but you have it in you to say, I wish you well, even if it's just in your prayers. That's level 1. And most people think that that's an easy level to get to, but you know what? When you have no clarity, and again, I remind you that forgiveness is not identical to clarity. Actually, forgiveness is for when a situation is unforgivable. Forgiveness is something we offer when there is no clarity, when there is no explanation, when what the person did is wrong. Forgiveness is an unburdening of the delusion that somehow what happened to you should have or could have happened differently. When Oprah talks about this, she often says that forgiveness is the understanding that the past could have been any differently than what it was. And from a Jewish perspective, since we believe that everything that happens to us for the good or what feels good, and for the bad, what feels bad, because those two are not always the same. Sometimes things can feel bad and they are actually good. Well, what would be an example of that? An inoculation that you give a baby, right? There are certain things, working out till your muscles are killing you. That doesn't feel good, but it is good. And, the converse of that, shooting heroin, drinking too much, behaving in a way that just kind of is free for all of your morals and ethics can feel good, but it's not good. So there's a confusion there. So in this first level, you work to get yourself to a place to say, I can't change the past. I can't change what happened. I would love a real apology, which I may never get. Maybe that person can't even hear me. But I am going to get myself to a place where, although my boundaries are up, I wish them well and not evil. That's level 1. Now, level 2. Level 2 is an interesting place. You're not completely willing to restore the relationship to its previous dynamic. Perhaps you were so badly hurt that, in level 1, you can't even be in the same womb as a person. But in level 2, you can start going back to those family dinners. Let's say it was somebody in your family, a sibling, a parent, or whatever. You can go to those dinners. You're still cool. You're not cruel, but you're cool. You're definitely not texting every day or speaking to each other on the phone. You're not ready to admit them entirely back into your life, but you are able to be in their presence. The heat is still there, but it's not the burning fire that it still was in level 1. In that case, you see them in the store. I did this once. I hid behind a clothing rack because somebody came into a store where I was, and I was not even in level 1 yet. I couldn't even look at this person. I literally hid like a 4-year-old in the rack, the rolling rack of clothes. But in level 2, you can be in the room. You see them somewhere. It's Shabbat. You can say Shabbat Shalom, smile, and keep walking. You don't have to ignore them. You don't have to look sideways when they come around. You don't want the friendship or the complete renewal, but you can still be around them and you can be civil. And that's important. What is level 3? Level 3 is the renewal of the relationship, not just back to its formal closeness in the way it used to be, but it is even more. Because sometimes when things are broken and repaired, they become more anti-fragile than they were before. They become stronger. If a relationship is like a rope, a thick rope, right? And it's severed. Somebody severs that rope, breaks trust, hurts you, causes you pain. That rope can never look identical to what it did before. But if you tie the ends together, not only can it be stronger, but the two ends that started here are now even closer. A beautiful example of this is a string of pearls. There are often knots between precious stones or pearls. Why? So that if it, God forbid, breaks, you're only losing the end pieces. In a lifelong relationship, in family, in marriage, in all friendships, there will be a series of severing and retying, severing and retying. And by the end of a relationship and a long life together, you will find that the rope of that relationship is filled with knots, which in some ways is even more beautiful. You know, the Japanese have an art form, it's called Kintsugi. Kintsugi is the idea that if broken pottery, back hundreds of years ago, that a shogun had a precious Chinese vessel that had shattered, and he sent it back to the factory to repair it. And when it came back, it had these big, ugly black staples, sort of really hideous attempt to put it back together. And he brought it to another shogun who was an artist. And this shogun mixed a formula of glue and resin and 24-karat powdered gold. And instead of trying to make the break disappear, instead he took lashes, thick lashes of this glue and put together this pot so that not only could you see where it had shattered, but the gold accentuated where it was broken and made that vessel manifold times more valuable than it even was before it had originally broken. And it was so popular that people were smashing their pots all over Japan just to have this Kintsugi model. This Kintsugi model is true in relationships as well, and it's true in the forgiveness of yourself. So if we put aside for a moment the 3 levels of forgiveness between us and others, let's look at that level of forgiveness of the self. First of all, you should know that when you do the work, the teshuvah, those steps, that it bothers you, that you stop the behavior, that you make reparation, that you admit to God, yourself, and another human being exactly what you did, that you do all of that and come up with a plan to ensure that it won't happen again, you're forgiven in the heavens. So why would you be holding on to rage at yourself? The next piece of this kintsugi for the self is to acknowledge, as Brene Brown wrote so eloquently about, vulnerability can be the birthplace of our greatness. Those particular cracks in ourselves, when we try to hide them from ourselves and from the world, makes us less approachable, less real. You know, Marianne Williamson, in her speech that she wrote for Nelson Mandela, a beautiful long poem, said this line once. She said the following, let me get it right. And when you let your own light shine, you unconsciously give others permission to do the same. When you allow the cracks and bumps and wears and tears of your life to not so much be hidden, but accentuate them with gold. In other words, you mine them for what you learned from them. And you carry your scars, as it were, not hidden, but as a lesson and a message to yourself and to others, and you're not ashamed of them, then unconsciously you allow other people to do the same. In your relationships, especially in the family, there will be a series of severing and retying, of breaking and reestablishing. It is inevitable. We are, as people, flawed. And there are many different kinds of people. Some work really hard to ensure that anyone who has wronged them has an opportunity to apologize. And at some levels, Rabbi Pliskin says, there are some people who will go out of their way and will accept any apology. As long as you say, I'm sorry, you're forgiven. There's another class of people who will go out of their way to make it easier for you to apologize so that they facilitate that peace. And then there is the third level, and that is the level of something that we say at night. It is the paragraph before the bedtime Shema Yisrael prayer that we say. And essentially what it says is it says, I hereby forgive anybody who sinned against me, whether in this transmigration or another, against my body, against my possessions, that I forgive every other Jew. And that you hope that no one will be punished because of your anger, and that you hope that you will be seen with the air and the vibe of forgiveness in the heavens. It's a nightly practice. That nightly practice acclimatizes us to see other people's flaws. My suggestion, if the forgiveness that you need to give is waiting for clarity, if you're saying to yourself, when I understand why she or he behaved that way, then maybe I'm willing to understand them. But if I don't know that, I can't do it. Allow yourself, encourage yourself at least to get to level 1. May God bless and keep my ex-sister-in-law far away from me. or whatever else it is. If you happen to be speaking about family here, force yourself, if possible, to get to level 2, or at least you can be decent and polite and in the same room. You don't have to get to level 3. As a mother of grown and flown children, I can tell you this. Just as they made mistakes and caused me pain growing up, boy, oh boy, when your kids get older, they make no secret of the mistakes you made. If you want to have a household where your children grow up willing to retie that cord, to create peace, then you have to model it. So let's just reiterate. Forgiveness is not identical to clarity. Forgiveness is something that's given for something that's unforgivable. The second thing is you can't forgive on behalf of somebody else. According to Jewish law, Yom Kippur comes for the sins between us and God to be forgiven by God. But God recuses him herself, as it were, when it comes to the things we've done wrong between people. That's up to us to repair. You can do it even when you're not asked, just for your own peace of mind, because a grudge is like a gargoyle. Your face becomes this sneering home for anger. It's not good for you. It's not good for anybody. The second piece is that boundaries, of course, are permitted. When a situation is truly toxic, you must save yourself. But the last thing I want you to remember is that when we take those broken pieces of ourselves or our relationship, we work to learn what can be gained, how the world or our relationship can be bettered. Well, then we metaphorically fill it with 24-karat gold. And then the things that hurt become valuable life lessons. My blessing to all of us out in Momentum Land and in the greater world is to recognize that from a spiritual perspective, as we are capable of getting at least to level 1, so will we be judged. My blessing to all of us is that we work hard to repair and reattach the broken pieces of our feelings, of our hearts, of our worlds, so that we might be the sort of people who become the progenitors of peace and wholeness in our families and for generations to come.
I've got 1,000 questions coming from deep within. Wanna cut through the clutter. I need to know that my next move matters.